Acting out, yelling at employees, making unreasonable demands, flouting the rules, is often a show of false power, but reality doesn't care about volume. In this video, we cover 6 Karens who got instant karma, each showing how cruelty and arrogance eventually meet a hard stop. It was May 14, 2018, in Phoenix, Arizona. The heat clung to the pavement outside a suburban grocery store, where shoppers moved quickly to their cars, shielding their eyes from the late afternoon glare. In the loading zone, a scene that started as irritation would escalate into a fatal accident, one that left bystanders shaken but unsurprised given the behavior of the woman at its center. Liz Thompson was 52 years old, known in her neighborhood for her temper and also for her size. At well over 200 pounds, her frame made movements slower and falls harder to recover from. She was not a professional under pressure, nor someone navigating complex risks. Instead, her daily life revolved around small errands, often punctuated by outbursts. Cashiers and clerks knew her as the customer who demanded managers over minor inconveniences. Neighbors avoided her driveway, recalling how she once screamed at a teenager for bagging groceries too slowly. Confrontation had become her identity, and she treated conflict as a way of asserting control. Rules, signs, and courtesies were simply obstacles she refused to acknowledge. The technical setting that day was ordinary, but unforgiving. Grocery store loading zones are designed for trucks to back slowly into designated spaces, guided by mirrors and sometimes spotters. Drivers rely on pedestrians to keep clear of these large vehicles, as blind spots make anything directly behind the truck invisible. Even at low speeds, a semi-trailer weighing several tons cannot stop instantly once rolling. Liz had pulled her SUV into the loading zone, blocking the space reserved for a delivery truck scheduled to arrive. When the driver honked, she refused to move. She stepped out, slamming her cart into the side of the truck while shouting insults. Witnesses later described her as red-faced, gesturing wildly, clearly determined to escalate instead of yielding. The driver, attempting to complete his delivery, inched the truck backward toward the dock. Store employees shouted for Liz to step aside, but she pushed her cart closer to the truck's path, treating the slow roll of the vehicle as another chance to prove a point. By this stage, the danger was obvious. Bystanders waved and called out, but Liz ignored them. She shoved her cart forward, then turned abruptly and caught her foot on the curb. The stumble was small but decisive. Her size made it impossible to recover balance once her weight shifted. She fell heavily onto the asphalt, directly behind the truck's reversing wheels. Her shopping spilled across the pavement as her body slipped into the blind spot. The truck's rear wheels rolled over her before the driver realized anything had happened. Screams erupted from shoppers and several ran forward waving their arms. The driver slammed the brakes, jumping out to see what had occurred. The scene was immediate and gruesome, with no possibility of survival. Emergency responders arrived within minutes, but paramedics could only confirm what was already clear. Liz had been killed instantly by crushing injuries. Surveillance footage reviewed later showed the sequence without ambiguity. Every step, from her blocking the zone, to the cart slamming, to her fall, was documented. Witnesses told investigators that warnings had been shouted repeatedly, but she had chosen to ignore them. The driver, moving cautiously and within regulations, had no way of knowing she had gone to the ground behind him. The Phoenix Police Department cleared the truck driver of all fault. Their report emphasized that the death was entirely preventable and resulted from pedestrian interference in a restricted area. The grocery store later installed additional signage and barriers, though staff admitted the measures were meant more to protect drivers from confrontations than to prevent another accident like Liz Thompson's. It was March 8, 2017, in Dallas, Texas. The dinner rush had just begun at a mid-range steakhouse, where the clatter of dishes and chatter of customers blended into routine noise. The atmosphere seemed unremarkable, yet within an hour, an accident would unfold, one that left bystanders shaken, but not altogether shocked, given the reputation of the woman involved. Barbara Ellis was 46 years old and well known in that establishment for her behavior. She worked a low-level office job nearby, but her self-image was that of someone who deserved more recognition than she ever received. Dining out had become her stage, and she frequently berated servers to reassert control. Her family mentioned that she once humiliated a young waiter to the point of tears over a glass of iced tea she claimed had too much ice. The restaurant environment itself was straightforward. Commercial kitchens are tightly organized spaces with slick tile floors, hot surfaces, and fryers filled with oil heated to nearly 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Staff are trained to move in coordinated patterns to avoid collisions. Customers are barred from entering these areas, not only because of food safety, but because a single slip or misstep can cause serious injury. That evening, she had been seated for less than 15 minutes when her agitation began. She complained loudly about the pace of service, despite her order being taken within standard time. When her drink refill did not arrive instantly, she pushed her chair back with a loud scrape and began yelling at the nearest server. Staff tried to calm her, assuring her that food was being prepared, but she continued shouting, waving her arms. Several diners turned in their seats to watch. Her outburst escalated when she stood and marched toward the service counter, pushing past a young hostess who told her firmly that customers were not allowed behind it. Barbara sneered and stepped through the swing door into the kitchen, declaring she would get it herself. Employees shouted for her to stop, but she advanced further. The kitchen had just been mopped in one area to clear up spilled water near the fry station. Staff knew it was slick, but Barbara moved forward with no caution. Within seconds, the predictable happened. Her heel slid on the wet patch, and her body whipped backward before snapping forward. She struck her temple on the sharp edge of a stainless steel counter with an audible crack that several witnesses later described. She collapsed sideways, her upper body striking the fryer station. A burst of superheated oil splashed out, searing her face, neck, and shoulders. The burns were immediate and severe. Kitchen staff reacted instantly, pulling her away and shutting down equipment, but she was already unresponsive. Customers in the dining room saw the commotion and the smoke of splattered oil rising. Emergency services were called, arriving within minutes. Paramedics attempted resuscitation, but she was gravely injured from both head trauma and extensive burns. She was transported to a nearby hospital, where doctors worked briefly before declaring her dead. The extent of her injuries left no realistic chance of survival. The aftermath was chaotic. The steakhouse closed for the night, and employees were interviewed by investigators before being sent home in shock. Management later installed additional signage and barriers to the kitchen entrance, citing safety concerns. Local news covered the incident briefly, framing it as a workplace hazard rather than focusing on Barbara herself. Among staff, the story circulated quietly for months, an unsettling reminder that a single act of arrogance had ended in a scene they would not forget. It was August 22nd, 2015, near Sacramento, California. A group of office workers gathered at a bungee jumping site built over the American River, the late summer air dry and still. It was meant to be a team-building retreat, the type of event companies use to break down barriers among employees. Instead, it became the scene of a violent death that could have been avoided. Cynthia Walker was 45 years old and worked in mid-level administration at a financial services firm. Colleagues described her as outspoken and controlling, quick to humiliate others in meetings. She often mocked co-workers for hesitating or second-guessing themselves, equating caution with weakness. Outside of work, she carried that same attitude into daily life, frequently berating store clerks and waitstaff. She seemed to thrive on being the loudest presence in the room and sought every opportunity to assert dominance. Bungee jumping had been chosen for the retreat because it was thrilling but safe when procedures were followed. Operators used heavy-duty harnesses, double-checked buckles, and attached each participant's tether to a reinforced steel rig secured above the bridge platform. The jump itself was about 160 feet, with the rope designed to stretch safely while avoiding contact with the rocks and river below. Staff emphasized that every step of the setup mattered. A jumper who ignored instructions or disrupted the process could put themselves in immediate danger. When it was Cynthia's turn, the risks increased, not because of the activity itself, but because of her behavior. She had already ridiculed one coworker for his hesitation, calling him spineless in front of the group. Her mocking laughter carried across the platform, making others uncomfortable. When the staff member began explaining the safety briefing, she waved him off, insisting she didn't need to be lectured. He attempted to guide her through the final harness check, but she brushed past his instructions. Several witnesses later recalled the growing tension. The operator tried to tighten a secondary buckle, but Cynthia turned away from him. She positioned herself on the edge of the platform, ignoring the fact that her tether had not yet been fully straightened and secured. The staff shouted for her to wait, but she smirked and jumped before the all-clear was given. The accident unfolded in seconds. Because she jumped before the tether was fully straightened, it tightened with a twist, snapping taut at an angle. The uneven pull swung her violently to the side, slamming her body against one of the bridge's concrete supports. The operators scrambled to reach her, rappelling down quickly, but her injuries were catastrophic. She had sustained massive blunt force trauma from the collision with the bridge and multiple fractures from the fall into the rocks. By the time they reached her, she showed no signs of life. Emergency responders were called by the workers, arriving within 15 minutes, but she was pronounced dead at the scene. Her funeral was sparsely attended, held at a small chapel in her hometown. Relatives spoke in muted tones, avoiding the subject of how the accident happened. Some remembered her as strong-willed, while others admitted privately that her temper often pushed people away. A cousin noted the absence of many co-workers, saying it felt as if the tragedy had closed a chapter no one wished to revisit. Instead of a collective outpouring of grief, the service carried an air of uneasy silence. It was November 19, 2016 in Chicago, Illinois. Holiday shoppers filled the mall, weaving in and out of crowded corridors while the escalators carried people between levels. What began as another Saturday of commerce would end in an accident so sudden and preventable that witnesses struggled to comprehend what they had just seen. Sharon McMillan, 50, was a longtime resident of the city who had built a reputation for being combative in public. She worked as a claims processor for an insurance firm, where co-workers described her as domineering and impatient. Away from work, her interactions were similar. Mall staff knew her as someone who pushed boundaries, demanding discounts or threatening complaints when things did not go her way. Her personality thrived on confrontation, which often escalated to shouting matches over trivial issues. Her neighbors said that risk for Sharon was not physical in the traditional sense, but social. She wielded it to exert control and to humiliate others. That afternoon, Sharon visited a kiosk to argue over a return, claiming the employee was intentionally stalling her. Witnesses later recounted how she berated the worker, drawing attention from shoppers nearby. Security was alerted, but before officers arrived, Sharon stormed away, muttering insults as she pushed through the crowd. Her frustration had not cooled, and she was visibly flustered as she approached the nearest escalator. Escalators are engineered to move thousands of people per day without issue, provided riders follow posted rules. Guardrails, comb plates, and overhead signs are standard safety measures. Still, accidents occur when people ignore the stability required on a moving staircase. Sharon, dismissive of such cautions, treated the mall as another arena to assert herself, oblivious to how quickly her actions could translate into physical danger. The area was packed with shoppers carrying bags. Multiple people urged caution as the flow of traffic narrowed onto the escalator entry. Sharon ignored them, shoving past a young couple and elbowing her way onto the moving steps. At that moment, another shopper jostled against her. Sharon, already leaning forward aggressively, lost her balance. The fall unfolded in seconds. She pitched over the thin metal rail, her arms flailing as startled screams echoed from below. Shoppers reached instinctively, but no one was close enough to grab her. She tumbled nearly 2 stories, her body striking a lower ledge before landing headfirst on the tile floor. The impact was loud, described by witnesses as a sickening thud. Shattered shopping bags and stunned children added to the chaos as people scrambled away from the scene. Others called 911. Security officers arrived within moments, finding Sharon motionless. Blood pooled rapidly beneath her head, and her chest showed no movement. Attempts at CPR were futile, her injuries far too severe. Medical responders confirmed her death minutes later, with catastrophic cranial trauma as the cause. In the hours after the fall, the mall partly shut down as shaken shoppers abandoned purchases and left in silence. Parents hurried children past the cordoned area, and nearby employees admitted the sound of her body hitting the floor stayed with them. One cashier even quit days later, unable to face the escalators again. Without official statements, the memory spread through personal retellings, with witnesses saying ordinary noises, rustling bags, voices. The escalator's hum triggered flashbacks, leaving the mall permanently marked by the image of a woman whose recklessness finally caught up with her. It was July 2nd, 2018 in Miami, Florida. The condo pool area was crowded with families. Children splashed in the shallow end while parents chatted from lounge chairs. Within an hour, this ordinary afternoon would leave the community stunned, witnesses replaying in their minds how one reckless moment turned fatal. Teresa Howard, 48, lived in the building and was known among residents for her confrontational behavior. She worked in real estate, a career that rewarded her bluntness, but also fueled a habit of belittling those around her. Neighbors described her as quick-tempered, often escalating minor issues into public scenes. Her motivation was less about preserving order and more about asserting control. She treated risk casually, assuming rules and precautions applied to others rather than herself. That afternoon, Teresa became enraged at a group of children laughing and splashing near the shallow end. She accused their mother of letting them disrupt the pool and launched into a loud tirade. The condo pool was maintained according to code, with lifeguards on duty, posted rules, and anti-slip surfacing around the deck. Still, wet pavement and running children created predictable hazards. Lifeguards emphasized caution, reminding adults and children alike about the risks of slick tiles and unguarded edges. Teresa ignored such warnings. Eyewitnesses later reported she stood over the water, pointing aggressively and shouting insults. The children retreated, frightened, while other residents turned away in discomfort. A lifeguard approached to calm the situation, but Teresa's voice only rose as she gestured toward the children, demanding they leave. The tension escalated until Teresa abruptly turned to storm off. Her sandals skidded on the wet deck, the water she had been standing near spreading across the tiles. Witnesses saw her lose her footing, her arms flailing as she toppled backward. The back of her head struck the pool's concrete edge with a sharp crack that echoed across the deck. In the same motion, her body rolled lifelessly into the shallow water. Two lifeguards dove in immediately, pulling Teresa's unconscious body to the surface. Blood from the head wound mixed with the pool water, leaving no doubt about the severity of the injury. CPR was started on the deck as residents gathered in shock. Despite repeated compressions and rescue breaths, Teresa never regained consciousness. Emergency responders called by the lifeguards confirmed her death within minutes of arrival, citing blunt force trauma. In the days that followed, conversations in the condo lobby and mailroom carried less sympathy than blunt honesty. Residents described the scene again and again, but almost always with the same refrain, that Teresa had finally pushed too far, and this time her own stubbornness had caught up with her. Parents admitted they felt relief that their children would no longer be targets of her shouting. It was June 11th, 2016, in Denver, Colorado. The off-leash dog park was buzzing with activity, dogs sprinting across dirt fields while their owners called out commands from the shade. Beneath the surface of the ordinary weekend scene, tension was brewing, and by the end of the morning, a single reckless confrontation would leave the park stunned and a life cut short. Elaine Roberts, 47, was a longtime resident of the neighborhood. She worked part-time as a bookkeeper and was known more for her constant complaints than her professional reputation. Neighbors often avoided her because of her habit of confronting people over minor issues: trash left outside, loud music, or the way they walked their pets. She carried that same confrontational approach into the dog park, where she repeatedly berated owners she viewed as careless. The park itself was structured for mixed use: wide open dirt areas for running, a pond for swimming, and clear signage noting that dogs would be off-leash inside the perimeter. Owners were expected to monitor their pets closely and intervene if aggression surfaced. Large breeds often played alongside small ones without incident, but conflicts required calm handling and distance. The environment was safe when people respected its dynamics, but those who ignored the unpredictability of animals introduced unnecessary danger. That morning, Elaine brought her terrier to the park and quickly grew irritated when a large German shepherd ran near her dog. Witnesses later said the shepherd showed no overt aggression, but Elaine interpreted its curiosity as a threat. She shouted across the field that the dog should be leashed, drawing unwanted attention. The owner called the shepherd back, but Elaine continued yelling, waving her arms and accusing him of endangering others. When nearby owners asked her to calm down, she refused, striding forward and pointing directly at the shepherd while demanding it be put down. Her movements escalated the situation. She leaned toward the animal, jabbing her finger in its direction. The shepherd, startled by her sudden lunge, reacted defensively. Its owner grabbed the collar, but before full restraint could be applied, the dog lunged forward. Elaine extended her hand in an attempt to push it back, which placed her forearm directly in line with its jaws. The shepherd clamped down hard, crushing and tearing tissue in one violent motion. The park fell into chaos. Multiple people rushed in, one striking the dog with a jacket, another prying at its mouth using an emergency wedge technique. The shepherd was pulled off within seconds, but the damage was catastrophic. Elaine collapsed backward onto the dirt, clutching her right forearm as bright red arterial blood sprayed from the wound. Witnesses described the volume as overwhelming, pooling rapidly on the ground. Several owners acted quickly. A bystander pressed a towel firmly against the wound while another screamed for someone to call 911. The towel was soaked instantly, and Elaine's face grew pale as her body slumped. When direct pressure failed to stop the bleeding, one man removed his belt and improvised a tourniquet, cinching it tightly above the wound on her upper forearm. For several minutes, they tried to keep her conscious, but her breathing became shallow. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes. They replaced the makeshift tourniquet with a medical-grade one and began fluid resuscitation. Elaine was rushed to a trauma center, but the brachial artery had been completely severed. Despite surgical attempts to repair the damage and massive transfusions, the blood loss had pushed her into irreversible shock. She was pronounced dead within hours of arrival. Animal control placed the German shepherd under mandatory quarantine, testing it for rabies and reviewing eyewitness accounts. The investigation concluded the dog had been provoked and was not inherently dangerous. The animal was released back to its owner after the holding period. Her funeral was held privately. Neighbors acknowledged her combative reputation, but expressed disbelief that such behavior could end in death. Thanks for watching. If this compilation of fatal arrogance and hostility entertained you, click here for more.